Though it will not be official until the Democratic National Convention in Chicago later this month, Vice President Kamala Harris's ascendance as her party's presumptive nominee has brought a new interest to elements of her background. Recent reports indicate that the vice president called her pastor, the Reverend Amos Brown of the Third Baptist Church in San Francisco, California, before deciding to formally enter the race. Now, what do we know about Reverend Brown and what shaping influence he might have had on the presumptive Democratic nominee? Joining me now to discuss this is Ryan Foley. He's a writer for the Christian Post who recently published an article examining Vice President Harris's pastor and her affiliation with the church. Ryan, welcome to Washington Watch.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's walk through your article on the Reverend Amos Brown of the Third Baptist Church in San Francisco, California. How long has the vice president been associated with this church?
She's been involved with this church for at least 2 decades.
All right, so she's been there for a while. What stood out to you as you did research on the Reverend Brown?
Well, the 2 main things that I would say stood out to me were only 2 of the 5 I wrote about, but he accused Trump of trying to incite a second civil war because after her debate with then Vice President Mike Pence in 2020, he called her this monster that was on the stage with Mike Pence and a communist. So this prompted Amos Brown to write an op-ed for the New York Times saying that his remarks were nothing less than naked racism and misogyny. And then he also said that his description of Harris as a monster was the kind of rhetoric almost designed to start a second civil war. So he wanted an apology from Trump and from Pence. And then the second thing that stood out to me was his comments after the 9/11 terror attacks. He was at a memorial service for victims who lost their lives in the terror attacks in San Francisco, and he was asking a bunch of rhetorical questions basically designed to imply that America kind of deserved it. He was like, America, is there anything you did to set up this climate? What did you do, either intentionally or unintentionally, in the world order in Central America and Africa where bombs are still blasting? So he was also talking about failure to show up at certain global warming conferences and a conference on racism as reasons why the U.S. might have deserved 9/11 terror attacks. And this made people in the audience very upset, including the partner of one of the people who died on the 9/11 terror attacks. And 2 of the big elected officials in California at the time, Senator Dianne Feinstein and Governor Gray Davis, got up and walked out of the speech. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's from San Francisco but was not yet House Speaker, got up there and made remarks of her own, and she was like, the act of terrorism on September 11th put those people outside the order of civilized behavior, and we will not take responsibility for that. So that was her basically rebuking what he said. So even in San Francisco, which is known for being progressive and anti-war, his comments did not sit well.
Interesting. So Ryan, one thing I saw in your article that I thought was of interest was that, and I'm not opposed to this at all, but the pastor Brown has served in various local government positions there in San Francisco, and so the positions that he's taken should be somewhat revealing of what he's been preaching and promoting, and we can't say that necessarily transfers to the vice president, but she's clearly being influenced by something. So what positions has he held there in San Francisco?
Well, he was a member of the Board of Supervisors. He was first appointed in 1996, and then he was elected to a full term that lasted from January 1999 to January 2001. He was not reelected for a second term, but he currently serves as the president of the San Francisco branch of the NAACP, and serves on the city's African American Reparations Advisory Committee.
I know that back when President Obama was elected, there was concerns about some of the statements that his pastor had made, because we assume that if someone has a pastor that they're sitting under, that they're being taught by, that's going to influence them. And Jeremiah Wright had made some pretty controversial statements. Do you see any parallels here?
Yeah, I do. That definitely was a big deal 16 years ago when Obama was running for Democrat nomination and for president. He ended up distancing himself from Reverend Wright because he thought that being associated with a guy who, you could say, made some similar remarks after 9/11 would hurt him as he tried to win the presidency. There's no indication that Harris is going to distance herself from Brown, but there are definitely some parallels between what happened 16 years ago and what's happening now, and we'll see how it plays out as the election gets closer.
All right, Ryan Foley, let me thank you for joining us. Appreciate what you do over there at the Christian Post. We appreciate the Christian Post and the work they do. That's Ryan Foley with the Christian Post.